Hi, this is Tom for PokerVIP.com and welcome to the fourth and final part of my series on Pot Limit Omaha here at Betfair. So we have two tables of €25 Pot Limit Omaha going on. Format's going to be very much as it was before. There are a couple of players that we have seen on previous videos and are indeed multi-tabling these tables. There is another €25 table going on the side, and Gibbon is playing on it and is up on all three, so it's a little unfortunate that he has direct position of us in both of these instances, but we will endeavour to make the best of that situation. Other than that, the games seem to be much as they were, with quite a large amount of loose play and limping, etc. So let's jump in and hopefully find some interesting spots in this half hour. Left-hand table, we start out with a semi-connected reasonable hand. And we are going to be defending here. Would prefer that the flush was a little better. Flopping reasonably. We're not going to be raising this flop for the simple reason that it's difficult for us to extract value off much that we beat. And we do also want to pot control against hands that actually have us beaten here. We're going to peel, however. 9-6 gets there, and obvious sets and two pairs previous have us beaten. Checks back. It's actually a really disappointing river. That said, there aren't so many eights in range for him. My options are either check or blocker. Both have reasonable merits here. I think we're just going to check it over. Does have some eights, namely in the form of like Jack 10-9-8, maybe the 10-9-8. It's unlikely he's folding that queen. Little disappointing result, but we don't lose too much there. It does kind of indicate how loose someone's playing when they are potting a king-queen with weak flush draw, however. I think that was a reasonable candidate for a check back, but he decided to pot. It's not the worst play in the world, but it's not the best either. And certainly his hand is going to have a hell of a lot of problems if it happens to face a check raise there. You know, if he continues, he's almost certainly behind. And folding that amount of equity always feels somewhat disgusting. So hence why the check back is going to be a reasonable option, at least a good chunk of the time. Min opening, something I haven't really seen on any other site, seems to be something that seems to be, if not prevalent at TonyBet, certainly not uncommon. I think we played the player who's min raised before, and certainly min raising that pile of trash is pretty horrendous, as is calling 3-bet out of position. From memory, I think he was very loose in one of the previous videos, so I guess he's living up to his reputation. Once against we have a straddle as well, which is going to change the dynamic of the table. And a reasonably healthy 3-bet, we can assume Mad is probably going to be calling any 4 here. If he's calling 7-4-3-3 rainbow, I can't imagine any combo he's going to be folding. So going to an interesting spot where the SPR is less than 1. Pretty standard shove. He's going to have a huge number of overpairs in his range. The board shouldn't have connected with his opponent too well, though some flush draws exist, of course. But in terms of 2 pairs, etc. Even naturally, the 7s get there. It's an incredibly loose play that got punished. Although I am a little puzzled why he's jammed the ace-4 draw there. I guess he's just trying to rep aces, but against this particular table at this stake on this site, that does seem a little optimistic. But he is telling a consistent story, I suppose. Loves his 7s. Does rebuy. Would have been a shame to lose 2 players, potentially break the table. I don't know if that's like a default amount he's been buying in for, if he's been short rolling the entire time, or if doesn't have much left in his account. No idea either way. We are going to be defending the queens on the right-hand table. Iffy flop, to be truthful. 10, average kicker, no redraws, not stunning 4-way. Aiming to check round, turn a queen, turn a 10. 5 improves me but can cause problems. As it is, the heart completely kills my hand. What little equity I happen to have on the flop is now almost certainly gone. Another big pot on the left-hand table. And checking queens through, yeah, potentially we could be good. It's very rare, but if it happens to happen, I won't be complaining. As is with a bet raise, we can very easily fold. Couple of options on the left-hand table. Certainly can 3-bet. If it's suited to the ace, I'd be very tempted to 3-bet. As is, I'm going to call. Either option's fine. We are going to be defending our queen here. It's a board that should favour the caller more than the pre-flop raiser. Typically, he can, of course, have some overpairs, can have some flush draws. When he checks, he's not exactly brimming with flush draws. He can have some 2 pairs, although they're largely 10-6 in this particular spot. Then we just continue the checking, taking showdown line. Can occasionally get a hand like King Jack 9 to stab. And with 2 pair, I think blocking half pot's absolutely fine here. Checking is also fine. Both options have a good chunk of merit. Get paid, sweet. In general, on a side like this where people are playing very loose, I am somewhat inclined to value bet a bit thinner, especially in spots where it's gone, got checked through twice, just to try and punish people calling off with 2 pairs, which does seem to be a thing that's happening a lot on this site. Weak 2 pairs, not necessarily always bottom 2, but something like top and third, top and fourth, second and third, that kind of thing. So we're just widening our value betting range in those kind of largely uncontested check spots. Occasionally we'll value own ourselves, but we're going to make enough money from it that the times it happens, it's still going to be profitable. If, of course, we find ourselves doing that and being shown non-nutted but strong hands consistently and losing, we'd obviously adjust. But for the meantime, it seems like an okay strategy. Mad has rebought and is instantly back into the action. Rainbow hand, suited, certainly double suited would be opening it, single suited is close. Rainbow, unfortunately not. Left-hand table, unsurprisingly it's raised. We're just not going to defend threes. Even against somebody who is playing something close to 100 VPIP, that hand is just not going to contest particularly well. It doesn't flop well. It doesn't have good flop equity distribution. Has kicker problems with just about every pair he makes, so we are not going to be contesting with that kind of hand. Pot side lead and in fairly instantaneous pot raise. Mad is trying to rep king, queen, and up, and I guess occasionally ace, jack, 10, 9. But it's going to be 2 pair and set dominant. Let's open our king kongs here. One thing I have noticed on the site, which is happening with a greater frequency than on other sites, is that people are defending out the small blind pretty wide. In general, you want to be defending the big blind, but the small blind you can certainly defend a far narrower range just because you haven't invested as much in the pot, so your immediate odds aren't as good as they are in the big blind. Going to be continuing with top set. Obviously some draws out there, that being one of them. Still beating 8-7, still beating some 2 pairs. If Majirmo decides to jam over this, obviously we're calling. If S-Train decides to pot raise this, we probably throw up and fold, especially since we block our own full house. If Majirmo overcalls this, we suddenly have a decision where we probably have to call, but 9.25 to win that. Even with implied is not quite good enough. It's a very disappointing outcome. Checking the turn is far too tight, and there's just so many turn cards we don't like, hence the bet on the turn. Unfortunately, this is just not a balanced raise. It's going to be very nutted. There's very few bluffs he can have that would consider bluffing into someone who's bet 2 streets. So, side fold. Unfortunate, but sometimes losing the minimum is just as important as winning the maximum. It happens. Flopping the nizzles against a player who's not afraid to put money in the pot. No value in 3-betting a hand like this into multiple people. Let's just attempt to realize its equity. Flops like that are not generally considered a good start to it, but it's going to be a more efficient way to maximize my profits versus 3-betting into 4 people. Well, my plans of check raising turn have just gone up in smoke. That being said, we are just going to be calling down against someone this wide. He's going to be barreling some 6x's. He's going to be barreling 8s and 9 blockers. And go for value when he checks turn. Sadly, we don't get paid. There is somewhat of an argument for raising flop, but when there's no flush draw, etc., to protect against, the argument is somewhat diminished. And truthfully, our opponent's been potting a lot. So the times he suddenly half pots on the board like that, I'm going to assume he is on the lighter side. So I'm pretty much allowing him to bluff off on brick runouts. Also, if I call, it kind of artificially caps my range. It means he's more likely to continue, less likely to believe a check raise. Unfortunately, best laid plans with that turn, but yeah. Sometimes you have to adjust on the fly. A little too raggy to raise, and I'm not really a fan of overlimping hands like that. Tens, especially with the limp in front, we're just going to fold. And folding raggy hands on both tables. Pretty standard on both accounts. Nothing more really needs to be said about those. Not exactly blessed with a plethora of outstanding starting hands right now. No to raise, which is going to check, try and realise some equity. It's a pretty good flop. Do expect him to take a stab. Can't really see a reason not to raise, frankly. We're trying to exploit value off Queen X, and we are marginally ahead of hands such as Ace 5-3. He'd also block some of their outs, so reasonably happy to get it in. And he's naturally flopped a set. Sigh. Pretty standard get it in spot though with that stack size. Just an unfortunate outcome. He has one of the very few hands that I'm actually losing to. Story of my life on TonyBet, it appears. I have no incentive to bluff this guy at all. Pretty much a lunatic. Sure. Folding rainbow nines, pretty standard. So yeah, unfortunately doubling the short stack, but pretty much unavoidable. Maybe I could title this video "How to Run Bad on TonyBet." It would be somewhat more accurate. Folding small blind, certainly defending big blind, but with one to act behind. It's going to be a fold. Interesting sizing from Majomo. Does set up a pot ship. If he's doing it with 4+, it's actually a really good sizing to keep draws involved. If he's bluffing, it's actually a reasonably good size as well, just because, again, it sets up a nice pot ship. And does appear, effectively by betting smaller, it's looking stronger from where he is. Opening kings. Hopefully these treat me slightly better than the last one. Again, getting calls from the big blind. From the small blind, sorry, which is somewhat unusual. Going to be checking back the jack. The probability is that one of my opponents has an ace. Certainly three-way, there is no reason to try thin c-bets, even though I technically have range advantage. It's pretty likely at least one of them has something they wish to continue with. On a check turn, it is tempted to continue. That said, I don't really rep much when I check flop. Open folding, sure. Real question is, is my opponent actually capable of checking Queen 10, checking low clubs? I have to assume, given I've checked twice, he's just going to be leading those for value, so let's try and get paid by ace-outs. Not sure I will, but that is the aim of the game. It does check Queen 10, that's a good check. One of those occasions I have value earned myself. He did also have an ace on flop, so absolutely fine checking flop and checking turn. Just an unfortunate river. Would be checking some two-pair combos there on river, but I think a set is just too strong not to take a little stab and attempt to milk somebody. Unfortunately, he's kind of at the top of what his check range can be there, or his check call range can be anyway. As annoying as it is to have an opponent limp or post in front, we are going to be 3-betting here just because of man's stack size. We're getting close to half his stack in pre-flop with aces, which is pretty good news. If the limper gets out of the way, it's obviously fantastic from me in terms of equity, but given what I've seen on this site, I don't consider that to be particularly likely. We are just going to be shoving on him now. He should fold. Based on what I've seen on this site, he probably won't. Huh. Who knew? up against kings. I have won an all-in. That is surprising yet welcome. Oh well, I got a number of those, so there's not much more I can do. But yeah, pretty standard spot. Obviously, squeezing's fine. Once he 4-bets, it means I can squeeze the opponent out of the pot. As a general kind of default on TonyBet, I have seen a lot of people call off there, hence why I was quite surprised he folded. It is a correct fold on his end and does indicate he's definitely one of the stronger players at this stake. Just with no knowledge on him, the default play I've seen a lot of people make is to call off there and, you know, try and spin it up sort of versus two people. But yeah, it's somewhat surprising to see him fold, but it's a good fold on his part. Given the lack of redraw, we are going to be check calling the Jack 10-9. As turns go, that's pretty good. There are going to be occasions my opponent checks this back, in which case we stab on river. If he checks, sorry, if he bets, we can consider check raising depending on sizing. Does bet. I'm going to put a smallish raise in here. Attempt to extract value off Jack 9, 10s, Ace Jack, hands like that. We do cover a lot of this board, but we also want to get value here. And I do fear that if I check river, he can check through a decent chunk of the time. And the question is, what do I fire on the river? If I were bluffing with hands such as hearts or diamonds or clubs, I would be potting. That said, I have very few bluffs in my range here, so we're going to size it something between 2/3 and 3/4 to attempt to get paid. Ace Jack probably folds purely because it can't be the straight, but any weaker full house I think is likely to pay off, although given is probably the strongest reg at this limit, so he certainly is capable of making good folds there, and if he watches this back and found a good fold with a non-nut full house, then well played, sir. Ace King 6-4, cut off just about acceptable. Button, it's pretty standard, but cut off I think is absolutely fine. Going to be folding the 8-6-7-3, trashy hand. Nothing more really needs to be said about that. You just throw it away and not think too much about it. Flopping 2-pair in a spot we also have significant range advantage. Our king also blocks some of the king-queen 10 combos. The only downside is we don't really block spades. That being said, we do have backdoor clubsies. I would have expected Ace-Jack to have raised flop, although not always. Given the 4 as well and backdoor clubs coming in, we are going to be potting turn. Telling the story of once upon a time we have 3 aces, etc. Turns actually, the river's actually pretty spectacularly bad for us. A lot of those king-queen 10 hands just got there. Occasionally we've been rivered by hands like Ace 10. So we're going to check. There is a possibility we're good. I don't expect it to be particularly high, but I also don't expect to get many folds here. He shows up with Ace Jack. It's probably about the only combo I can get a fold on river. Somewhat disappointing. It is a pretty reasonably played hand from where he's sitting there. With his lack of redraws, it's absolutely fine to have just taken a check call line. If the clubs had not come in, we'd have checked back turn with S6, but I felt having the presence of the 6-4 and the clubs meant it was fine to bet. Going to check back nut flush on this board that we basically can't ever hit, having raised under the gun. It also means when we hit our diamonds, it's more disguised. If we start betting turn, you can put us on the ace of diamond blocker and station down with some 2-pair combos and straight combos. Can also lead, figuring that we have very few flush combos in our range, which, given we have the nuts, we're pretty happy about, with the exception of the 4-3 for the straight flush. And we're going to tell a story of once upon a time I have Jack high diamonds that check flop. Once he checks, again, I don't have a huge number of bluffs here, I just have certain combos of value hands. So we're aiming to sort of extract value off king high and queen high diamonds. occasionally a straight. Only get the one street. That being said, one street is certainly better than no streets. The tens, when we have the suit and the connectivity with the ace, we are going to raise. The presence of the ace means we are less likely to be 3-bet. That being said, if we are 3-bet, it's not fantastic given how this hand is basically dominated by most of our opponent's 3-bet range. Pairs that they 3-bet are going to be bigger than this. And our hand is somewhat polarized once the SPR is reduced. Flop that doesn't exactly favor an under the gun raise. Pretty standard check back, give up spots. Barring a 10 on the turn and a checked round spot, opponent goes close to pot. Pretty reasonable fold. Left hand table, totally reasonable button open. Pretty standard. Getting 3-bet isn't stunning. The hand isn't stunning in the terms of how it plays. That being said, we are in position. So we're going to peel. Pretty disappointing flop, to be truthful. Just going to release, especially against a pot size. I don't really think he needs to necessarily pot size here. Something like 3.75 or 4 makes a good chunk more sense than pot, but nitpicking. I guess he's just trying to bet a size that allows him to shove turn, which further adds credence to the fact that he's nutted. That being said, I have ace high, so it doesn't really matter what he bets. Not exactly fantastic flop. I mean, it can certainly hit a big blind defend range, but bluffing into 2 people in a limp spot doesn't exactly seem like a world of fun. If we turn an 8, we can start going for value and bet fold. Pretty terrible run out, truthfully. Opponents are calling probably Jack X plus, or at least decent jacks. And yeah, obviously a flush would call down. I really question why he's check river there, actually. Even on a paired board, given it's been checked through 3 times, the third nut flush is very likely to be good. Yes, it sucks to get check raised there, but you can count the number of occurrences that's going to happen on the fingers of one hand. It's incredibly unlikely. Starting off with the check with our queen, pretty reasonable defend from big blind. Do block clubs with the king. We are going to check call 1 and evaluate what he does. If he continues after that, this is actually a really interesting turn for me to now pot, or at least lead, given my blocker has now shot up in value. It also reduces the combos of flushes that my opponent can have. And yeah, pretty much the nut turn from where we are, barring, you know, obviously 2 pairs and the queen do improve our hands in raw terms, but suddenly our blocker has just shot up in value. You know, if we're not intending to lead that turn as a bluff, we shouldn't be check calling flop. So yeah, pretty outstanding turn from where we were. Half pot flop with the flush draw. Granted, you don't have many deuces. We do have a good chunk of overpairs with flush draws when we do this. If he raises, just kind of give him credit for a deuce, as much as it sucks. As long as he's not like over raising here, which we don't really know that he is. With the ace high flush, it's tempting to call the raise and basically evaluate turn. The king high flush is just a little weaker, so we're not going to do that. If we played on this side more regularly and we made a note that he was raising all those spots, then obviously we can adjust accordingly. But given I only know that he's a reasonably competent player who makes, or appears to be making, good amount of money on this side, you know, I know that he's going to be capable of raising there with sort of more bluffy combos, but I don't know that he sort of necessarily over raises there. So making any adjustment based on a lack of knowledge is going to be potentially quite expensive. So if I played on this side regularly, I would be making notes about what he's doing in those particular spots when they came up. Given the lack of the HUD, the notes would be particularly vital. But given I don't know that knowledge, I'm just going to take the default approach, which is to fold. Yeah, if our opponent was constantly raising those spots, then we can certainly put it in a check call range. And we would be balancing that out by checking our deuces to check raise and check raising some hands like ace 4-3 with nut hearts and things like that. So we are going to play one more hand on each table before this video is over. We're just going to overlimp here. Hand is reasonably strong, but not strong enough that I necessarily want to raise, and play the hand out of position for 100 big blind deep. Plus, we have to worry about what Given is doing. That's pretty good as flops go. We're going to just lead out. No point in allowing the hand to check round. Check raising kind of scream strength. You know, if somebody happens to have a Jack-8, we're free rolling them. If somebody wants to raise a hand like King, Queen, Jack, again, we've got pretty good equity against that hand. We want to force hands like 9-7 to at least peel 1. Not as good a turn as I was hoping for. Falls in a check call range. King Queen is the obvious candidate, although that probably goes larger at this point. And check calling river most likely, given that, yeah, we chop it up. That's pretty reasonable. It's obviously a very annoying outcome given how much equity he had versus his hand on flop, but you know, that is the nature of the beast. So with that being said, that is the conclusion of part 4. Any questions, comments, by all means, you know, fire away. I am also part of the PokerVIP review session with pros, which is a forum post. You get a free review with a number of coaches on the site. So if you complete a 1-hour video and send it along saying you want me to review it, then it will be passed along my way and I will be on it. So with that being said, I've been Tom and I wish you all well.